Hrólfr Kraki, Hroðulf, Rolfo, Roluo. Hrólfr Krage was a legendary Danish king who appears in both Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian tradition. His name would in his own language have been *Hrōþiwulfaz. Both traditions describe him as a Danish Scylding, the nephew of Hrothgar and the grandson of Healfdene. The consensus view is that Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian traditions describe the same people, whereas the Anglo-Saxon Beowulf and Witsides do not go further than treating his relationship with Hrothgar and their animosity with Frode and Ingeld. The Scandinavian sources expand on his life as a king and on his relationship with Hroðgar, Hrothgar's brother. In Beowulf and Witsides, it is never explained how Hrothgar and Hroðulf are uncle and nephew, but in the Scandinavian tradition, Hroðgar conceived Hroðulf by raping Yrsa, not knowing that she was his own daughter. Beowulf. The poem Beowulf introduces Hroðulf as kinsman. Later, the text explains that Hroðulf is Hrothgar's nephew and that each was true to the other. Hrothgar is given 3 siblings, brothers Hroðgar and Hroðgar, and an unnamed sister, all the children of Healfdene and belonging to the royal clan known as the Scyldings. The poem does not indicate which of Hrothgar's siblings is Hroðulf's parent, but later Scandinavian tradition establishes this as Hroðgar. Hrothgar and Queen Wialhthau had 2 young sons, Hrólfr and Hroðmund, and Hroðulf would be the guardian in case Hrothgar dies. In a deliberately ironic passage it appears that the queen trusts Hroðulf, not suspecting that he will murder her sons to claim the throne for himself. No existence of any Hrólfr or Hroðmund, sons of Hrothgar, has survived in Scandinavian sources. This Hroðgar is sometimes said to have been killed by Hrólfr, vindicating the foreshadowing in Beowulf. The Scyldings were in conflict with another clan, a tribe named the Heathids, led by the king Frode and his son Ingeld. It is in relation to this war that Hroðulf is mentioned in the other Anglo-Saxon poem where he appears. Witsides. Hrólf and Hroðulf. A common identification is that Hrólfr Kraki is the same as the character Hroðulf in Beowulf. There seems to be some foreshadowing in Beowulf that Hroðulf will attempt to usurp the throne from Hrothgar's sons Hrólfr and Hroðmund, a deed that also seems to be referred to in Saxo Grammaticus as Gesta Danorum, where we find, "Our king, who laid low Hrólfr, the son of Bok the covetous, and wrapped the coward in death." Hrólfr is the form we would expect Hrólfr to take in Danish, and we find personages named Hrólfr or Hrok are similar in most versions of the Hrólfr Kraki tradition but differently accounted for, seemingly indicating that Scandinavian tradition had forgotten who exactly Hrólfr Hrok was, and various storytellers subsequently invented details to explain references to this personage in older poems. The future slaying of Hrólfr may be the occasion of the future burning of the Hall of Heorot in the beginning of the poem, though some take it, instead, to refer to the legendary death of Hrólfr Kraki, who in Icelandic sources is said to have died in the burning of his hall by his brother-in-law Hjörvar. Beowulf and Bjarki. The standard view is that, if Beowulf himself has a cognate character in Hrólfr Kraki's story, it is Bodvar Bjarki, who also has a younger companion, Halti, perhaps matching the Beowulf character Wiglaf. Beowulf comes from Gotland, and one of Bodvar Bjarki's elder brothers, Thorir, becomes a king of Götaland. Moreover, like Beowulf, Bodvar Bjarki arrives in Denmark from Götaland, and upon arriving in Denmark he kills a beast that has been ravaging the Danish court for 2 years. The monster in Hrólfr Kraki's saga, however, is quite unlike the Grendel of Beowulf, but it does have characteristics of a more typical dragon, a creature which appears later in Beowulf. Just as Beowulf and Wiglaf slay a dragon at the end of Beowulf, Bodvar and Halti help each other slay the creature in Denmark. Proponents of this theory, like J.R.R. Tolkien, argue that both the names Beowulf and Bjarki are associated with bears. Bodvar Bjarki is constantly associated with bears, his father actually being one. In some of the Hrólfr Kraki material, Bodvar Bjarki aids Adils in defeating Adil's uncle Ali in the battle on the ice of Lake Vannon. In Beowulf, the hero Beowulf aids Eagles in the Adil's war against one. As far as this Swedish adventure is concerned, Beowulf and Bodvar Bjarki are one and the same. This match supports the hypothesis that the adventure with the dragon is also originally derived from the same story. Hrothgar and Ror. As for the king of the Danes, Hrothgar, he is identical to Roluo, the uncle of Hrólfr Kraki, who in other sources outside of Beowulf rules as a co-king with his brother Helgi. But in those sources it is Hrothgar who dies before his brother, who departs to Northumberland to rule his wife's kingdom, leaving Helgi, the sole rule of Denmark. In Beowulf, Helgi has died and Hrothgar is the primary ruler, with Hrothulf, son of Helga, as a junior co-ruler. Furthermore, the Swedish kings referenced in Beowulf are adequately matched with the 5th and 6th century Swedish kings in Uppsala. This has obviously nothing to do with the common origin of the Beowulf and Hrólfr Kraki legends in particular, but simply reflects a shared genealogical tradition. Widside. The poem Widside also mentions Hrothgar and Hrothulf, but indicates that the feud with Angel did not end until the latter was defeated at Hrothgar. This piece suggests that the conflict between the Scyldings Hrothgar and Hrothulf on one side, and the heathens Frode and Ingeld on the other, was well known in Anglo-Saxon England. This conflict also appears in Scandinavian sources, but in the Norse tradition the heathens had apparently been forgotten and the conflict is instead rendered as a family feud. Chronicon Lithrense and Annal Lundenses. The Chronicon Lithrense and the included Annal Lundenses tell that Healfdene had two sons, Helga and Ro. When Healfdene died of old age, Helga and Ro divided the kingdom so that Ro ruled the land, and Helga the sea. One day, Helga arrived in Halland, Lolland, and slept with Thor, the daughter of one of Ro's farmers. This resulted in a daughter named Yrse. Much later, he met Yrse, and without knowing that she was his daughter, he made her pregnant with Rolf. Eventually, Helga found out that Yrse was his own daughter and, out of shame, went east and killed himself. Both Helga and Ro being dead, a Swedish king, called Hakon in the Chronicon Lithrense proper, and Athazel in the Annal, corresponding to Eagles, forced the Danes to accept a dog as king. The Dog King was succeeded by Hrólfr Krage. Rolf Krage was a big man in body and soul and was so generous that no one asked him for anything twice. His sister Skölda was married against Rolf's will to Hrōþiwulfaz a High-Ward, a German Earl of Skane, but reputedly Rolf had given Skölda to him together with Sweden. This Hrōþiwulfaz arrived in Zealand with a large army and said that he wanted to give his tribute to Rolf, but killed Rolf together with all his men. Only one survived, Wig, who played along until he was to do homage to Hrōþiwulfaz. Then he pierced Hrōþiwulfaz with a sword, and so Hrōþiwulfaz was king for only one morning. Gesta Danorum. The Book 2 of the Gesta Danorum by Saxo Grammaticus contains roughly the same information as the Chronicon Lithrense and the Annal Lundenses, i.e. that Ro and Helga were the son of Haldanus. When Healfdene died of old age, Hrothgar took the land and Helge the water. One day during his sea roving, Helge arrived at Thuro, where he found and raped the young girl Thora, which resulted in Urs. When Helge after many years returned to Thuro, Thora avenged her lost virginity by sending Urs to Helge, who unknowingly raped his own daughter. This resulted in Roluo, who was a gifted man, both physically and intellectually, and as brave as he was tall. After some time, Helge repelled a Swedish invasion, avenged Hro by killing the Swedish king Hrothgar, and made the Swedes pay tribute. However, he committed suicide due to shame for his incestuous relationship with Urs. Roluo succeeded him. The new king of Sweden, Hrólfr, thought that the tribute to the Dana might be smaller if he married the Danish king's mother, and so took Urs for a queen. However, after some time, Urs was so upset with the Swedish king's greed that she thought out a ruse to run away from the king and at the same time liberate him of his wealth. She incited Hrólfr to rebel against Roluo, and arranged so that Roluo would be invited and promised a wealth in gifts. At the banquet, Roluo was at first not recognized by his mother, but when the fondness was commented on by Hrólfr, the Swedish king, and Roluo made a wager where Roluo would prove his endurance. Roluo was placed in front of a fire that exposed him to such heat that finally a maiden could suffer the sight no more and extinguished the fire. Roluo was greatly recompensed by Hrólfr for his endurance. When the banquet had lasted for 3 days, Urs and Roluo escaped from Uppsala early in the morning in carriages where they had put all the Swedish king's treasure. In order to lessen the burden and to occupy any pursuing warriors, they spread gold in the path, although there was a rumor that she only spread gilded copper. When Hrólfr, who was pursuing the escapers, saw that a precious ring was lying on the ground, he bent down to pick it up. Roluo was pleased to see the king of Sweden bent down, and escaped in the ships with his mother. A young man named Wig was impressed with Roluo's bodily size and gave him the cognomen Krage, which meant a tall tree trunk used as a ladder. Roluo liked this name and rewarded Wig with a heavy bracelet. Wig then swore to Roluo to avenge him if he was killed. Roluo later defeated Hrólfr and gave Sweden to a young man named Hrōþiwulfaz, who also married Roluo's sister Skuld. Skuld, however, did not like the fact that her husband had to pay taxes to Roluo, and so incited Hrōþiwulfaz to rebel against him. They so went to Leho with arms hidden in the ships, under the pretense that they wanted to pay tribute. They were well received, but after the banquet, when most people were drunk asleep, the Swedes and the Goths proceeded to kill everyone at Roluo's residence. After a long battle involving Roluo's champion Bjarki, who fought in the shape of a spirit bear until he was awakened by his comrade Halti, the Geats won and Roluo was killed. Hrōþiwulfaz asked Wig if he wanted to fight for him, and Wig said yes. Hrōþiwulfaz wanted to give Wig a sword, but he insisted on receiving it by taking the hilt. Having the hilt in his hand, Wig pierced Hrōþiwulfaz with the sword and so avenged Roluo. Swedes and Geats then rushed forward and killed Wig. The Swedish king Hroðulf, the brother of Hrólfr, succeeded Roluo and became the king of a combined Sweden and Denmark. Hrólfr Kraki's saga. In Hrólfr Kraki's saga, Healfdene had 3 children, the sons Helgi and Hróþiwulfaz and the daughter Sini. The sister was the eldest and married to Savil Jarl, with whom she had the son Hrokr. Healfdene was murdered by his own brother Hrothi, and the 2 brothers had to seek refuge with a man called Vivil on an island, until they could avenge the father and kill Hrothi. Whereas Hróþiwulfaz moved to Northumbria and married the king's daughter. Helgi went to the Saxons wanting to woo the warlike Queen Olaf. She was, however, not interested and humiliated Helgi by shaving his head and covering him with tar while he was asleep. and sending him back to his ship. Sometime later, Helgi returned, and through a ruse, he kidnapped the queen for a while, during which time he made her pregnant. Having returned to her kingdom, the queen bore a child, a girl, which she named Yrsa after her dog. Yrsa was set to live as a shepherd until she was 12 years old, when she met her father Helgi, who fell in love with her, not knowing it was his daughter. Olaf kept quiet about the parentage and saw it as her revenge that Helgi would wed his own daughter. Helgi and Yrsa had the son Hrólfr. Learning that Helgi and Yrsa lived happily together, Queen Olaf traveled to Denmark to tell her daughter the truth. Yrsa was shocked, and although Helgi wanted the relationship to remain as it was, Yrsa insisted on leaving him to live alone. She was later taken by the Swedish king Adils as his queen, which made Helgi even more unhappy. Helgi went to Uppsala to fetch her, but was killed by Adils in battle. In later, he was succeeded by his son Hrólfr. Hrólfr soon assembled 12 great berserkers named Rómundar Hati, Hrólfr Skjöldandi, Svupdeg, Begath Vidserker in Havati, Hackling, Hrōþiwulfaz, Haki in Freyni, Vottr in Mikkilev Flathi, Starulf, Halti in Hugprthi and Bodvarbjarki. After some time, Bodvarbjarki encouraged Hrólfr to go Uppsala to claim the gold that Adils had taken from Helgi after the battle. Hrólfr departed with 120 men and his 12 berserkers, and during a rest they were tested by a farmer called Rani, who advised Hrólfr to send back all his troops but his 12 berserkers, as numbers would not help him against Adils. They were at first well received, but in his hall, Adils did his best to stop Hrólfr with pit traps and hidden warriors who attacked the Danes. Finally Adils entertained them but put them to a test where they had to endure immense heat by a fire. Hrólfr and his berserkers finally had enough and threw the courtiers, who were feeding the fire, into the fire and leapt at Adils. The Swedish king disappeared through a hollow tree trunk that stood in his hall. Yrsa admonished Adils for wanting to kill her son, and went to meet the Danes. She gave them a man named Vogr to entertain them. This Vogr remarked that Hrólfr had the thin face of a pole ladder, a Kraki. Happy with his new cognomen, and Hrólfr gave Vogr a golden ring, and Vogr swore to avenge Hrólfr if anyone should kill him. Hrólfr and his company were then attacked by a troll in the shape of a boar in the service of Adils, but Rolf's dog Gram killed it. They then found out that Adils had set the hall on fire, and so they broke out of the hall, only to find themselves surrounded by heavily armed warriors in the street. After a fight, King Adils retreated to summon reinforcements. Yrsa then provided her son with a silver drinking horn filled with golden jewels and a famous ring, Sviagris. Then she gave Hrólfr and his men 12 of the Swedish king's best horses, and all the armor and provisions they needed. Hrólfr took a fond farewell of his mother and departed over the Fyrisvellir. When they saw Adils and his warriors in pursuit, they spread the gold behind themselves. Adils saw his precious Sviagris on the ground and stooped to pick it up with his spear, whereupon Hrólfr cut his back with his sword and screamed in triumph that he had bent the back of the most powerful man in Sweden. Hrólfr lived in peace for some time. However, his half-elven half-sister Skuld was married to Hjorvard, one of Rolf's sub-kings, and she began to turn her husband against Hrólfr, under the pretext that they would wait 3 years before paying the accumulated tribute at one time. Skuld assembled a large army which included strong warriors, criminals, elves and Norns. She used seethe to hide the great muster from Hrólfr and his champions. They then arrived at level 1 Yule for the midwinter celebrations, with all the weapons hidden in wagons. A fight started, and like in the account found in Gesta Danorum, Bodvar fought in the shape of a spirit bear until he was awakened by Hulti. Skuld used her witchcraft to resuscitate her fallen warriors, and after a long fight Hrólfr and all his berserkers fell. Skuld became the ruler of Denmark but did not rule well. Bodvar brothers Elkfrothi and Thorir Houndsfoot went to Denmark to avenge the brother. The Swedish queen Yrsa gave him a large Swedish army headed by Vogger. They captured Skuld before she could use her magic and tortured her to death. Then they raised a mound for Hrólfr Kraki, where he was buried together with his swords Konung. Skjoldunga Saga. The Skjoldunga Saga relates that Helge was the king of Denmark together with his brother Hrólfr. Helge raped Olava, the queen of the Saxons, and she bore a daughter named Yrsa. The girl later married King Adilus, the king of Sweden, with whom she had the daughter Skulda. Some years later, Helge attacked Sweden and captured Yrsa, not knowing that she was his own daughter. He raped her and took her back to Denmark, where she bore the son Rolfo. After a few years, Yrsa's mother, Queen Olava, came to visit her and told her that Helge was her own father. In horror, Yrsa returned to Adilus, leaving her son behind. Helge died when Rolfo was 8 years old, and Rolfo succeeded him, and ruled together with his uncle Hrólfr. Not much later, Hrólfr was killed by his half-brothers Rericus and Frodo, whereupon Rolfo became the sole king of Denmark. In Sweden, Yrsa and Adilus married Skulda to the king of Åland, Hrōþiwulfaz. As her half-brother Rolfo was not consulted about this marriage, he was infuriated and he attacked Åland and made Hrōþiwulfaz and his kingdom tributary to Denmark. After some time, Adilus requested Rolfo's aid against King Olaf of Uppland, and Rolfo sent him his berserkers. Adilus then won the war, but refused to pay the expected tribute for the help, and so Rolfo came to Uppsala to claim his recompense. After surviving some traps, Rolfo fled with Adilus's gold, helped by his mother Yrsa, and sowed it on the Fyrisvellir. Hrōþiwulfaz and his queen Skulda rebelled against Rolfo and killed him. However, Hrōþiwulfaz did not live long after this and was killed. Rolfo was succeeded by his father's cousin Roric, who, however, had to leave Skane to Valda and could only keep Zealand. Skaldskaparmal. In the Skaldskaparmal by Snorri Sturluson, the story of Hrólfr Kraki is presented in order to explain why gold was known by the Canning Kraki's seed. Snorri relates that Hrólfr was the most renowned king in Denmark for valor, generosity and graciousness. One day a poor boy called Vogger arrived and expressed his surprise that such a great king would look like a little Pole. Hrólfr said that Vogger had given him a name and gave Vogger a golden ring in recompense. In gratitude, Vogger swore to Hrólfr to avenge him, should he be killed. A second tale was when the king of Sweden, Adils, was in war with the Norwegian king named Ali, and they fought in the battle on the ice of Lake Vänern. Adils was married to Yrsa, the mother of Hrólfr, and sent an embassy to Hrólfr asking him for help against Ali. He would receive 3 valuable gifts in recompense. Hrólfr was involved in a war against the Saxons and could not come in person but sent his 12 berserkers. Ali died in the war, and Adils took Ali's helmet Battleboar and his horse Raven. The berserkers demanded £3 of gold each in pay, and they demanded to choose the gifts that Hrothulf had promised Hrólfr, that is, the 2 pieces of armor that nothing could pierce, the helmet battle-boar and the mail-coat, Finn's heritage. They also wanted the famous rings of Viagris. Hrothulf considered the pay outrageous and refused. When Hrólfr heard that Hrothulf refused to pay, he set off to Uppsala. They brought the ships to the river Firis and rode directly to the Swedish king's hall at Uppsala with his 12 berserkers. Yrsa welcomed them and led them to their lodgings. Fires were prepared for them and they were given drinks. However, so much wood was heaped on the fires that the clothes started to burn away from the bodies. Hrólfr and his men had enough and threw the courtiers on the fire. Yrsa arrived and gave them a horn full of gold, the rings Viagris, and asked them to flee. As they rode over the Firis Velia, they saw Hrothulf and his men pursuing them. The fleeing men threw the gold on the plain so that the pursuers would stop to collect the gold. Hrothulf, however, continued the chase on his horse Slongvir. Hrólfr then threw Viagris and saw how Hrothulf stooped down to pick up the ring with his spear. Hrólfr exclaimed that he had seen the mightiest man in Sweden bend his back. Ynglinga Saga. The Skjöldunga Saga was used by Snorri Sturluson as a source when he told the story of Hrothulf and Yrsa in his Ynglinga Saga, a part of the Heimskringla. What remains of the Skjöldunga Saga is a Latin summary by Angrimur Jonsson, and so the 2 versions are basically the same, the main difference being that Angrimur's version is more terse. Snorri relates that Hrothulf betook himself to pillage the Saxons, whose king was Guy Jaffa and Queen Alof the Great. The king and consort were not at home, and so Hrothulf and his men plundered the resident cities, driving cattle and captives down to the ships. One of the captives was a remarkably beautiful girl named Yrsa, and Snorri writes that everyone was soon impressed with the well-mannered, pretty and intelligent girl. Most impressed was Hrothulf, who made her his queen. Some years later, Helgi, who ruled in Leffe, attacked Sweden and captured Yrsa. He raped Yrsa, his own daughter, and took her back to Leffe, where she bore him the son Hrólfr. When the boy was 3 years of age, Yrsa's mother, Queen Alof of Saxony, came to visit her and told her that her husband Helgi was her own father. Horrified, Yrsa returned to Hrothulf, leaving her son behind, and stayed in Sweden for the rest of her life. When Hrólfr was 8 years old, Helgi died during a war expedition, and Hrólf was proclaimed king. Snorri finishes his account by briefly mentioning that the Skjöldunga Saga contained an extensive account of how Hrólf came to Uppsala and sowed gold on the Firis Velia. Grata Song. The Grata Song contains a stanza sung by the giantesses Fenja and Menja. It only names Yrsa and the situation that her son and brother will avenge Frodi. This piece cannot refer to Hrólfr Kraki's saga where Frode was the half-brother of Healfdene, because this Frode was killed by Hrothgar. It can, however, be interpreted through the Skjöldunga Saga, in which Hrothulf's uncle Hrothgar was murdered by his half-brother Frode. Gautrek Saga. Hrólfr Kraki is mentioned briefly in Gautrek Saga, written around 1300, when the adventurer Ref comes to him with a gift consisting of 2 dogs. In return for this gift, Hrólfr gives him a helmet and a chainmail, both made of red gold.